Well, welcome, Faith family, and anyone who's watching this. This is going to be the first of who knows how many of David and I sitting down with questions that come in. Could be related to the series that we're going through, or just in general. I wanted to call this David and Graham Solve Everything, but for some reason, David thought that was overselling things a little bit. I think he's selling himself a little bit short. I'm trusting him to carry all the weight here. So anyways, in all seriousness, this is us as pastors seeking to really honor the idea of having conversations around Scripture, having conversations around what God is saying, and looking to discern together. And so we don't intend this to be an answer everything or to end conversations. This is intended to be part of a continuing conversation. So if we don't get to something, or if we stir up more questions, send them back in and we'll do another one of these. So we have had kind of 3 questions come in over the last few days, and just an observation someone made I'd like to touch base on. So we're going to kick this off with David. If you want to kind of read the first question, and we'll start going from there.
Sure. So the first question was, is 1 Thessalonians 5, 1-5, a commentary by Paul on Jesus' words found in Matthew 24 and Luke 21? And that
Right.
1 Thessalonians is that concerning how and when this will happen. It'll be like a thief in the night.
Right. So I'm going to, just because it's a short section, I'm going to let you kind of, if you're listening kind of on your own, go back to Matthew 24, Luke 21. Those are parallel passages of Jesus' teaching. They're ones that I preached from just a week or so ago from when we're recording this, which is why the question came. And I'm just going to actually read the text real quick because it's just a short section. Paul writes, "Now concerning how and when all this will happen, dear brothers and sisters, we don't really need to write you, for you know quite well that the day of the Lord's return will come unexpectedly like a thief in the night. When people are saying everything is peaceful and secure, then disaster will fall on them as suddenly as a pregnant woman's labor pains begin, and there will be no escape. But you aren't in the dark about these things, dear brothers and sisters, and you won't be surprised when the day of the Lord comes like a thief. For you are all children of the light and of the day. We don't belong to darkness and night." And so, yeah, this is very much Paul riffing on Jesus' words, the same image of a thief that, you know, how do you be ready for a thief? If you know he's coming, you have to stay up all night. But good thieves don't advertise. And so, you know, it's just that there's a constant call to be ready. But again, Paul reiterates something that is not present in the same way in Jesus' words, but it is there as you continue on through 24 and 25, is our identity is in Jesus. And Paul is just going, look, we don't have to be scared of the coming of Jesus because we're already connected to him. And so then there's that thing of being alert and sober as you continue the text in chapter 5 of Thessalonians. You know, being alert and sober is not reading the news headlines and trying to match what, you know, the newspaper is saying to Scripture in some way. But really, Paul says in verse 8, how we be prepared is, let those who live in the light, anyone who's in Jesus, be clear-headed, protected by the armor of faith and love, and wearing as our helmet the confidence or hope of our salvation. So it's that we put on faith, hope, and love. It sounds like a good song, actually, but it's really that we keep our allegiance to Jesus, we keep loving God, loving others, and we keep being confident that God will rescue. That's how we are take encouragement. That's why we don't need to give into fear, and that's why we don't need to get into worrying about when exactly Jesus is returning. So there's my thoughts. David, you want to fix whatever I've said?
No, it's great. Like, I would say the faith, hope, and love thing is so key in this time when most of what we're getting is the opposing reality. Like, it's the bad stuff, right? Like faith. Like, what is the opposite of faith? Like we have just utter doubt. We don't know who to believe. We don't know, like, am I a Christian? Like, am I on the right side right now or not? Who should I believe? Well, faith, very clearly that Jesus is enough. It's going to be good. Love, like how much of this teaching teaches us to dislike or hate somebody else. Like the end times are coming and these people are the enemy. And this state is doing the wrong thing and these people can't be trusted. Like even church against church, they're not teaching the right thing. They're not prophesying the right way. And it's not based in love. It's just not based in love. And then hope, right? Like that true understanding that God has it under control, that God is good enough, that we are able to be protected by him, that he is able to come gather us when he needs to. And again, like that doubt, that fear, that ambiguity, I think is just obviously of the enemy. And so when you're looking at these passages and when you're looking at teachings about these passages and areas, pulling back to that faith, love, and hope thing, I think is pretty key.
I love how Paul just ends, this section. I know it's kind of beyond the verses that were asked about, but verse 11 of chapter 5, Paul kind of ties off his letter in a way by saying, so encourage one another and build each other up just as you are already doing. And I think, just pointing to that faith, the hope, the love that is to be the center of how we live together. So I won't add anything to that. So hope that helps answer that question. So the second one, this is probably the most, we'll probably talk about this one the most, but here's the question. And basically it's the essence of how do we talk to our unbelieving friends about prophetic scriptures so that when we are raptured or kind of that event happens, that they will know the truth of what has happened without them thinking we're nuts today. Now, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it's basically kind of how do we balance forewarning our neighbors who don't believe in Jesus about his coming and about events related to that without sounding like we're part of a crazy cult. Is kind of one way. So I'll toss this to you, David. You can start this one.
Yeah, like I think there's a lot of layers to this, and I think a lot of it is contextual based on who the friend or family is that you're talking to. I like to bring everything back when it comes to how should I be to like my neighbor to how Jesus talked about things. I think is a pretty good jumping off point. And one of the strong points of this is that Jesus doesn't ignore this. Like Jesus does talk about this pretty openly and pretty strongly, especially when you get into like the more apocalyptic kind of like style of like, well, when he talks a little bit of end times. And so one, I don't think we should ignore it, but I also don't think it should be the focus in which we try to show Jesus to others. Like I think there's some base level stuff about who he is and what he called us to before we get to the end times. But I would also say like a lot of apologetics, a lot of how we talk to our friends and neighbors, I think comes down to that relationship, what role we have. Like, are we the balancing act sometime between like a really wild, crazy lifestyle and thought process, and then we kind of like balance that out for them? Are we like the one Christian they know? Do they have a really bad experience with religion? Like all those types of things I think really matter. If I was going to be talking, like if I wanted to bring up this type of thing to somebody who didn't already have a relationship with Jesus, I think just the reality that Jesus did talk about this would be good to share with them, that he did suggest we need to be ready and that there is something coming. But then I would probably really try to stress a knowledge of the end times without a relationship with Jesus doesn't save anybody. And so like I think like we really need to get to that relationship with Jesus thing, and that this might be a heavy meal for a young Christian if it's not presented and discussed in a good way.
Yeah, I'm kind of, as I was reflecting on this question, I was kind of, my first instinct is to separate out from like this question, separate out the rapture question and that kind of part, and just to me focus on that. What is the gospel? Because frankly, the gospel is crazy enough without bringing in some of those kind of secondary or even speculative kind of things that we talk about within the church. You know, the book of Acts, the early church, they were, Jesus was crucified, Jesus rose from the dead, Jesus is king, and he deserves our allegiance. And that's kind of that essence of Jesus is king and we owe him everything. And that call to surrender. And yes, Jesus is a coming king and a soon coming king. And so that's about as far with an unbeliever as I would go with the end times questions and doctrines and all of that. It's Jesus is coming. We don't know when. And the rest of the stuff, already the gospel is crazy enough. I mean, Paul talks about it. It's foolishness to Gentiles. It's a stumbling block to Jews. And I guess I struggle with seeing how as Christians at times we've put internal arguments or doctrines and made that a foundation of what we want to share with non-Christians. Like we just stick to the basics, stick to the foundation, and go from there. So I hope that helps. I don't know if any further kind of thoughts on that, David, just to tie off.
Yeah, like I think the one component of this for me is that this is a time where the conversation will come up more naturally. Like there is enough in the news and in the media and in movies and TV shows to like people right now do have a lot of different ideas about what is coming, how the world's going to end. Like, you know, like just natural, normal people probably talk about this somewhat more than they used to. And so like I do think there is a little bit more space to say that Christ is different. Yeah. Like there is a little bit of space to say like, nuclear war is going to like end us all, or we're not even going to get there because of like, you know, the sun's getting too hot, like whatever people are discussing, and say like, no, like I actually, like Christ talked about this, and like I think Christ is a pretty good insider in the game. But again, like I would refrain from making it just another weird theory and making it another hyperbolic argument. Like I would really stress back into like, not like Christ definitely talked about this. And what he said was that it's all taken care of and that we need to be ready. And being ready means being on his side, being in relationship with him. And like really make it down that, not like well, everybody's going to come, he's going to come on horses. And like, I think like we could make it hyperbolic again. And again, good conversations for people who are Christians and who already have that relationship. But I think people are interested, and I think people don't actually know what Christ taught. And so getting to the basics of what Christ taught, I think is going to be a pretty good stepping stone for this space anyway.
And I think one thing, just as you're saying that, I'll just maybe close this off so we don't go too long on it, is that listen to where people are at and answer the questions they have rather than introducing, again, those speculative or kind of, you know, is it literal horses that we're going to see, or those different things that we speculate on as Christians, perhaps from the book of Revelation, for example. But what are the questions that the people, the person that we're talking with, what questions are they asking? And go that far without the pressure to try to introduce the whole of Christian doctrine into a conversation with a new believer. Again, if that's helpful, hope it is. If it leads to more questions, send them in and we'll keep talking about it. But for now, why don't we hit on the third question, David?
So this one is about the mark of the beast. What do we do as Christians if we have to take the mark of the mark of the beast because it is required for some reason? And like there's lots of different theories floating around about what those legal reasons or government reasons could be.
Yeah, so Mark of the Beast, mentioned in Revelation a couple times, 13, chapter 13, verse 17, 16, it's mentioned there. So I'm actually going to, in a number of, probably a few months from now, preach more on the passage where it appears, but I'll try to give some kind of answer to that right now. I think there's a misunderstanding of what the mark is, and a lack of understanding of fully what it signifies, which is causing some of the confusion. Again, usually it comes from those that are kind of really read the headlines and the news and kind of try to tie the mark to something technological, which again, for me, doesn't really do justice to the text. The mark of the beast, it's kind of connected to, well, there's a mark in Revelation 7, verses 2 and 3, a mark that's given to the people of God. And so the mark of the Lamb, or the mark of God, and the mark of the beast really are another way Revelation talks about the biblical theme. There are two sets of people in the world. There are those that are having given their allegiance to Jesus, and those that have given their allegiance to anyone, anything but Jesus, which is typifies and kind of coalesced into the beast. And again, there's kind of more about that, and we'll get into that. But it's not so much that we take the mark as that it's given to us, or it's kind of revealed as to where our allegiance truly is. And so there's not going to be a scenario, at least I can't conceive of a scenario, where someone who is truly a follower of Jesus is going to unintentionally or be tricked into taking this mark, because it's not so much a thing as an identification that we already have. And so, it's, I think, I wonder at times if we really doubt the goodness and the knowledge of God with some of our thoughts around the mark of the beast, because it's, do we believe that God won't reveal to his people who are seeking to live faithfully in covenant with him, that he will somehow allow his people to unknowingly give their allegiance away? It's, God is a jealous God, it says in the scriptures. I mean, he is going to look to protect his people. And so I don't think we need to fear taking this mark in some way that will then jeopardize our salvation. This is, again, in Revelation, talking about an identity that's already had, but is being revealed through what we see and read about in Revelation. Anyways, there's some initial thoughts from me.
Yeah, like I'd say, again, that mark word, like I remember a time when I thought it was more of like a needle prick, or some sort of an identifier, an imperfection. And I didn't really quite understand the tattooing branding aspects of it, which has really changed my reading of those passages more into maybe like a livestock perspective, that like we are branded with the mark of Jesus. And why are we there? Because we're in his pastures, we're in his flock, our hands are near, like he's near us, like we are his. And so he has that option, just like those who are close to the devil, those who are close to evil, those who are under evil's rule and in evil's pastures will get branded with that as an identifier of who they are as well. And I think we get a little bit confused with that, wondering like as if Jesus and the devil are just at a crossroads and they're just picking up sheep and goats as they see. Like I think a lot of it is like we are what we are. Like we cannot be taken into the devil's camp just because he wants us. Like we are Jesus's, and therefore we will be marked with Jesus. He can't just pick us up without us going to him. And I think that has deeper spiritual realities than we realize. Like I don't think the mark of the beast is going to be just I went into the wrong store that day, or I lived with the wrong government that era. It will be a spiritual heart, my spirit and soul decision. It's not going to be, I think, like again, like I'm open to there being physical aspects to this, but I think like it is going to be a spiritual reality, the mark of the beast. I don't think it's going to be like a Tim Hortons card that I accepted in the mail. Like I think it's going to be that my heart shifted, that my desires are different, that I chose the wrong team, that I chose the wrong assurances. Um, and I think that's what we need to be more aware of.
At minimum, it's gonna, I mean, the text, the gist of Revelation, because again, one thing I didn't mention is that this has Old Testament roots. I mean, this book is just interwoven with, things in the Old Testament. And where I kind of go to is, I mean, think of the high priest in the Old Covenant. He actually wore the name of the tribes on kind of that breastplate of that he had, and the name of God was on a gold plate, literally on his head. And so there was this mark of identifying with, and that theme again just kind of runs through the Old Testament. And so I think we jump too quick to our modern technological framework, and we got to root Revelation in really the Old Testament and the teachings of Jesus. So anyways, that may have stirred more questions than answered, and that's fine. Again, if that helps, great. But again, we can continue the conversation. Last one, just want to make just an observation that in the midst of the questions that came that I thought was worth noting. And the person who kind of sent in a couple of the questions just made a comment that there's been a trend in recent decades of people setting dates for Jesus' return, and that they found it a struggle because of that. It kind of obscured understanding texts related to the end times. It kind of caused them to go off, not off kilter, but just struggle to kind of, well, what do the texts say? And anyways, I'll toss it over to you, David, because just to start, but then I'll just kind of toss him a thought or two of mine.
No, it's a good observation, and I think hopefully nowadays we're becoming a bit more aware when the result isn't an accident. Like I think spiritually speaking, it's meant to confuse you, and it's meant to distract you, and it's meant to get you in polarizing conversations and polarizing views in camps. Like Jesus is clear. We're not going to know the time. That's it. And so when we are distracted by so many people in books and camps where they say that they know, we are losing focus from the one thing we're actually supposed to be focusing on.
Yeah, I just, same thing along those lines. I'll just add, I mean, date setting of any sort is something Jesus expressly told us not to do. And so anyone who's kind of going down that road in any way is already automatically disobeying Jesus. And therefore it's going to obscure what the text says, because the text is about Jesus. Revelation, John says it's from Jesus. And so if we're already disobeying his command, we're not going to find it easy to understand what's going on, at least in some regards. And so that's just, for me personally, I find anyone who starts going, I think it might be this year, or I think it might be next year, it's going to be, in the next 5 years, I automatically just start disregarding and just putting aside, because I think even that vagueness, because sometimes date setting gets couched in that kind of vague, I'm not saying it's this month, but it's going to be, and then they put a time frame on. That's expressly what Jesus told us not to do. That's not how to be ready. I mean, I've preached on that, so I won't go into that. But I just encourage, if you find people that are doing that, personally, my advice would be put down their book, stop listening to their podcast, and just enter the scriptures, read it in community, and just start asking ourselves, how do we love God and love others today? How do we bless and invite people to follow Jesus? We'll spend our time far more productively for the kingdom. Anyways, that's final thought from me. So that's all we've got for now. So thanks for the questions. And as they come in, we'll do this again. God bless.